Hello, and welcome back to the Best for Baby podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Rogers Sargent, and I am very excited to be talking today about the top 3 things that I would tell every parent, or ideally every pregnant woman in the world, if I could. And these are the top 3 things that would limit the effects we see of modern parenting on our babies these days. And I'm talking specifically about the 2 things, probably, that I get the most patient referrals for, the things that I treat little babies for the most. And that is elements and aspects of flathead syndrome and, of course, delayed gross motor development. Now, we've spoken about these things in the past and on previous episodes. We've also spoken about tips to address them. But today, I just want to make it really clear and simple because I had a patient this week and Mum has given me permission to talk to you about it because she's feeling really sad that she's in the position she and her little baby are now in, and she hopes that it can be of help to people. And this is kind of where I've been coming from and why I started the podcast is because I feel like I'm sitting on all this information and unfortunately it's not getting out there and helping people. And so we are now trying to remedy everything once the mistakes have been made. And it's great if I can see the children or if another healthcare professional can see these children and help them. But it's not always the case. Not everybody has access to these healthcare professionals who can really just cut through all the myths and help parents. So it's kind of ignited my spark again to talk about these things. And I've tried to make it really clear cut and simple so you can go away with the information and please spread the word to all your pregnant friends or friends you have with little babies because it's really, really important to get the message out there. So, firstly, I would like to tell you about Lucy, who is the mum of the little girl that I saw this week. Lucy had her daughter, well, her little girl is now 5 months old, and she was born with a tongue tie. And as is the case, very often babies who've got tongue ties have got a lot of stiffness in their upper bodies, the shoulders, the upper limbs, the neck muscles. There's a correlation between tongue tie and this tightness and stiffness in this area. And so on her journey to get through the tongue tie, she had a lactation consultant who said the little girl feels very stiff, so referred her on to an osteopath. The osteopath then told Lucy that her little baby has got a head turning preference, which, if you aren't familiar with this podcast, you won't know about. But it's basically when a baby is always looking in one direction. And that's because that stiffness in the neck is asymmetrical. It's more on one side than the other. And there's loads of reasons why this can happen. But hers had to do with her delivery. So the little baby had been delivered using forceps. And with forceps, you're obviously using traction, and a little bit of damage can occur to one of the muscles on one side of the neck. Now, it's a muscle injury, it's a minor injury, and it's perfectly acceptable when you are trying to get a baby out safely. And if you're using forceps, this can be quite an emergency birth or a stressful birth, or the baby needs to come out quickly because something's going on. So when forceps are used, we are quite tolerant of the damage that can happen to the muscles. But unfortunately, as is often the case, people aren't made aware that that little bit of damage to the neck muscle, as it heals, it could create scar tissue, it could create shortening in the muscle, and then what happens is the baby ends up always looking in one direction. And so it makes sense because the babies are always on their backs. One side on the back of the head becomes very flat. Now, what happened was the osteopath that identified all of this worked on the head turning preference quite successfully, and told Mum to do a lot of tummy time, which she did. However, Lucy's little baby didn't like tummy time, so it was a great stress. And by this stage, I think the baby was already a couple of months old and had not been doing tummy time before this, and to suddenly start doing tummy time was quite difficult. And it was stressful, and she was just really battling. And unfortunately, the head shape started to deteriorate more and more. And so Lucy went to her GP, who assured her that these things improve on their own. She doesn't have to worry, everything is fine. And so she went away and stopped worrying and stopped feeling stressed about trying to do the tummy time and stopped the osteopathy, stopped everything, and just relaxed and enjoyed her little baby, which is wonderful in many ways. But unfortunately, the GP had given a piece of advice that healthcare professionals often do give. And I don't want to criticize because I can understand it, because in the past, these conditions did correct themselves. And it's modern parenting that now is preventing these conditions from sorting themselves out as they did in the past. And so many healthcare professionals still believe that they are going to sort themselves. And also, some genuinely do sort themselves out. And I've talked extensively about this on previous podcasts. It's got a lot to do with the baby as well as the habits of the parents, and the baby's natural desire to move that will determine whether this is going to sort itself out or not. So sometimes it does. So you can understand why there is still this misinformation being given. However, what you want to do is just drive home to parents that these are the strategies that you should be focusing on to make sure that your baby's head shape doesn't deteriorate, doesn't get worse, and this is how we can resolve it if this happens. And so she obviously went away and didn't do anything for a long time, and it got quite severe. And Lucy then, which got me really excited because this is the reason why I started the podcast. But Lucy had found my podcast somewhere, had listened to an episode, downloaded my freebie PDF, which gives tips on head shape and tummy time and, all of these things. And in it, it also guides you to understand that if your child's head shape is quite progressed, if they have a head turning preference, perhaps you need more help, or you could fall into a category where a helmet may be an appropriate choice for you, shall we say. And so she then got more help and actually a referral on to an orthotics company who do the helmets. Now, Lucy is based in England, outside of London. So she had to come in and do all the assessments and things in London. And it's a really good, reputable company. And they don't tend to put helmets on babies unless they are quite convinced that it's going to help. And the little baby, when I assessed them, had already been given the helmet. They just started using it. But Lucy was looking for more information to help if there was anything else that could go with it. And what we found is that her baby girl actually had still a huge asymmetry in her neck muscles, even though when she lay on her back, she was looking in both directions. And there were some other components that go along with this muscle asymmetry. And it was lovely just to give her the advice and tell her what to do and some exercises and activities that she can now go off and do and get the best result for her little girl. However, she just feels that she was at a point where she was having help before things had deteriorated, and she could have avoided the journey that she's been on. And she was really disheartened by that. And I think perhaps I've become blasé about it because this is what I see. And in fact, I'm talking about Lucy because she's given me permission to talk about her. But in the last month alone, I've had a number of other cases where their story is almost identical. And so I'm used to it. I'm used to coming too late almost and saying, oh, I wish I could have spoken to you just a little bit earlier so we could have avoided this. Now we've talked about Lucy and her journey, and that's been particularly with the head shape. But if we look at the other thing that I said, that modern parenting sets our babies up to have issues with, and that is their development, their delay in development. And again, very often I'm coming in too late, and well, it's never too late, shall we say. I'm seeing the children, and if I could have helped a little bit earlier, we wouldn't have had these delays. Now, delays in themselves are not an issue because the children are going to get there in the end. But we do find, hand in hand with those delays, we have certain milestones that are omitted or skipped out, or bad habits forming. And all of this comes together. We don't know definitively what the long-term consequences of these things are, and they're not major things. But what we know is that the babies are not functioning optimally as they would if they weren't having these setbacks caused by what we call or what I call modern parenting and modern parenting techniques. So let's dive into it and it'll make a bit more sense. And hopefully you will go away going, this is what we're going to do going forwards. So the first thing is obviously tummy time, because I speak about it all the time. And really, it's my number one thing. If you can go away knowing that you should be doing tummy time from the moment you bring your baby home, from day one, when your baby is born, you start with tummy time. You adapt it to your baby's age and you make sure it's done safely. Now, it's my experience that a lot of parents only start doing tummy time around the 3-month mark because I don't know, it seems to be the age that everyone's decided that the baby's that much stronger and sturdier, and maybe it takes that amount of time where you have really gotten to grips with handling and flipping your baby over and all these sorts of things. But unfortunately, by that time, your baby's that much longer, that much heavier, and they haven't been doing the strengthening work on their tummies in order to lift that body that is now that much longer and heavier. So it's really hard for them. They are now not used to being on their tummies, and so they don't like it. And when a baby doesn't like something, we don't force them. Of course, we don't force them. And so it's becoming a real problem. And what I want to say is that we start just on your chest. That is tummy time. With your tiny baby on your chest, you sit on a sofa and lean back, and your baby's on your chest. Bonus points if you can do skin to skin. It's a lovely activity. So that's how you're going to start, is tummy time on your chest. Now, in those early days, again, a lot of people say, well, we can't do tummy time because my baby is always asleep. And newborn babies are always asleep. Of course they are. And so we worry because we know babies can't sleep on their tummies. Well, this is my key point that I'm trying to get out there. Everyone is terrified of their babies being on their tummies and falling asleep. And yes, we don't let our babies sleep on their tummies overnight in their cots. Definitely not. What we can do is the other however many hours of the day when you are awake and you are supervising your baby can be on their tummy, and if they fall asleep, they can nap on their tummies. But it has to be done safely. Now, in order for that to be safe, you've got to do it in a safe space. So that is the biggest thing. You always do tummy time in a safe space because you're going to assume that if your baby is really comfortable and really happy, they are going to fall asleep while you're doing tummy time. And so if it's in a safe space, you can leave them there to nap if you are awake and supervising. And then it's okay. And then that sleeping tummy time counts for your tummy time for your baby. They don't have to be awake on their tummies to be getting the benefits of tummy time. And this is because little babies, when they're in light sleep, they have what we call general movements. They sort of wriggle and do little movements constantly, even in their sleep. And when they do that, pushing into a surface that they are resting on, it's building up their core strength. It's doing a lot of other benefits, but they are getting all the benefits of tummy time, even though they are asleep when they're on their tummies. So that checks off a huge amount of tummy time if your baby has napped there. The other point I want to make about this is it's the same for if your baby's going to be lying on their side, because we want to be doing side lying as well right from the beginning. But again, babies can fall asleep on their sides or they can flip onto their tummies quite easily from the side. So you would always treat side lying as tummy time in the same way. It's got to be supervised. It's got to be during the day when you're awake. I mean, that's what supervised means, let's face it. And it's got to be in a safe space. So what is a safe space? Well, you've got to have an area where the baby's airway, so that's in a little baby, it's the nose, because babies tend to breathe through their noses. But usually when we say airway, we're talking about the nose and the mouth. That has to be clear with good airflow around it. So you wouldn't be doing any kind of tummy time with your baby in those early stage cots or bassinets or Moses baskets, because those tend to have high walls. And if the baby's on their tummy, they wriggle because they have those general movements. It does move them, and they could end up with their head turned to the side and their nose right up against the side of the Moses basket or the cot side. And those tend to be, as I say, those next to me cots that are all in the early days tend to have a solid barrier. So what happens there is that carbon dioxide builds up and that then puts them at the risk of cot death. So it's essential that you don't do it in those early baby cots. For the same reason, you wouldn't do it on a really soft sofa or on an adult's bed because those are usually very soft. If you have a look, a baby's mattress nowadays is quite firm, and it's for this very reason. They are safer because if the baby does end up on their tummies, they don't sink into that soft mattress like they would on an adult's bed or a very soft sofa or a pillow or a super soft cushion. So when they are on their tummies, before they've developed head control, the head will be turned to the side. And so they can easily sink into a soft surface, and then that airway is obstructed and there's no fresh air flowing nice and easily to it. So it's got to be a firm surface without sides. For that reason, if you have a nice firm sofa that they can't roll off, that's the other thing. Wherever you put your baby, no, before you expect them to roll, they're going to roll. So you don't want them rolling off a sofa. But often in the newborn stages, some people have those enormous sofas that are quite firm and then they think this is perfect. But be careful if there's an armrest there or a cushion or anything that can create a barrier to good airflow. So you really want miles of space, I always say, and then parents kind of overdo it, but then they know that the baby is safe. The head is turned all the way to the side. They've got good airflow coming to the nose and mouth. So I tend to say a safe space is usually on the floor because no baby can roll off it. And if you've got a tiled floor or wooden floors, get those lovely mats. There's different types of mats. You know, lots of people have the foam puzzle pieces. You can have a roll-up mat, a gym mat, a yoga mat, anything that's soft enough to be comfortable for the baby, but not a soft surface, not a pillow or a cushion that they're going to sink into. If you've got a carpet, then obviously just put down a soft blanket. What you want to be conscious of is that you don't want rough edges that's going to be pressing into the baby's face and then they get the imprint of whatever they've been lying on there. So you just want something smooth and soft enough to be comfortable, but not soft enough to fall into, not against a wall, because for the same reason we don't have the airflow, not against a piece of furniture, just have good airflow and be in your view so you can see the back moving while they're breathing and you can sit with them initially, so let it be somewhere comfortable for you. And as you and your baby become more confident and you understand that they're safe and you've watched them, then perhaps you would step away, not out of the room, but you might step further away from the baby so that you put your mat down, you create your safe space like on the kitchen floor, and then you are cooking and the baby's there having a nap on the kitchen floor. And so we make ourselves more and more confident as we try it, knowing that we are supervising our babies, we are watching them, we are looking at the position of their head turned to the side, at the good airflow, at the back moving and breathing, and knowing that they're in a safe space and doing good tummy time like that. So that's my number one, really, is that we are so terrified of letting our babies nap on their tummies and their sides. And it's actually really important that we do this because in the early days, the babies are sleeping too much to be able to steal tiny little windows of tummy time or side lying time. It needs to coincide with nap times, but they need to be done safely. And we would never do it overnight. And the other thing that a lot of parents say to me is, my baby's now rolling onto their tummy in the nighttime. And I'm terrified. I'm setting alarms to wake myself up to go and check if my baby's rolled onto their tummy. And that's so sad. I wish we could get the message out as healthcare professionals and say, you know, if your baby is rolling over, if your cot is a safe cot for being on their tummies, it's okay. You shouldn't be waking yourself up or rolling them back. So when we look at making a cot safe, once our babies are rolling, there's a few things we're going to take into account. And the first is, if your baby is rolling onto their tummies, they're probably too big to be in the little next to me cots. So those next to me cots, Moses baskets, bassinets are out. We don't do tummy time in those. In a cot, we have the bars, so we have airflow. But number one, that cot cannot be up against a wall because you're not going to have airflow there. If the baby's right and on the side of the cot with their face almost against a wall, that's not good enough airflow. So we want a good gap between the wall and the cot so we have free air flowing around the baby's head. That's number one. Number two, you don't want a cot bumper. Now, a cot bumper is going to create basically like a wall that the baby's little face could get stuck against, and therefore reduction in airflow. Um, a lot of cot bumpers do claim to be breathable, and I just think, why would you take the risk? So do your research if you really want a cot bumper, but I wouldn't. And yes, a lot of people say, but the whole point is that my baby's going to bump their head. Yes, they can bump their head, but the height at which the bumper is at is really if the baby's on their tummy and they push up and they bang forwards their heads. I guess they could sit and fall back and bump their heads. If they're an older baby standing up, they would fall forwards. They would hit their head on the top railing from standing. They wouldn't really be hitting their head low down where a bumper is. And why I'm talking you through that is to make you see that they're unlikely from that kind of height, banging their heads, to do themselves a serious injury. Whereas a cot bumper, certainly one that's not breathable, the risks are far more serious, shall we say. People also say to me, but they could get stuck, their arms stuck or their legs stuck in the cot railings. Again, yes, they could. Arms, not so likely. We don't often find arms getting stuck. We do find legs getting stuck because they're longer, they're broader, they're more tricky to pull out once a little leg goes through a cot railing. Again, it's unlikely to be a serious injury, and it's the kind of thing your baby cries and you go and help them out. But the best thing is to pop them, certainly if they're over 6 months, is into a little zip-up sleeping bag. And that should eliminate that concern. And that's when I'm saying is when your baby is now independently rolling over onto their tummy during the night and ending up sleeping like that. As long as you've created that safe space with your cot, it's fine for your baby to sleep like that. The other thing is just make sure you never have loose objects, no fluffy toys, no muslins, no loose blankets, no pillows, none of that stuff. Because obviously if your baby rolls onto their tummy, that can really obstruct the airway. If you are using blankets, then what you always want to do is obviously tuck the blanket underneath the foot of the mattress so that it doesn't slide up, and it should only extend up to the level of the shoulders, so that's not going to end up covering their faces. So that's my first thing, is do tummy time right from day one. Start on your chest, sneak in some skin to skin if you can, because that's amazing for our babies, and progress it to doing that tummy time in a safe space. And then if your baby does happen to fall asleep while they're doing their tummy time, leave them there because you know they are safe to do it. It's during the day, it's supervised, it's in the safe space. And the idea is if you have been doing it with your baby from early on, they're going to be a baby who quite enjoys being on their tummy. And so you're going to graduate this to more and more awake time spent with your baby on their tummy. And what the gold standard is, what we're always wanting to get to a point of, is that when you're leaving your baby to just free play on their own when they're awake, you're doing it with your baby on their tummies. Because they're so comfortable and they've spent so much time on their tummy, they're quite happy there. And then when you leave them on their backs, they end up rolling over onto their tummies. And so the development goes along more smoothly and more quickly because they're happy to go onto their tummies. Whereas babies who are obviously not comfortable being on their tummies because they haven't had opportunity to learn it and to get comfortable with it, they don't learn to roll over onto their tummies very quickly. And it's a little bit trickier to roll from tummy to back. So we find that rolling in general is delayed because what they do is they stay on their backs and they stay there very happily. They don't learn to roll then onto their tummies because they're not driven to do so. So really, all that tummy time is going to obviously create a situation where there's no pressure on the back of the baby's head. So we don't have head shape issues when we are having the correct amount of tummy time. And we don't see the delayed development that we have been seeing with babies because they haven't been doing enough tummy time. So I won't go on too much about it because there have been other episodes about tummy time. My second point is about putting babies in positions that they shouldn't be in before they're ready to be in those positions. Is something that all parents do, and of its own, it's not so much an issue, but unfortunately, modern parenting forces us to do it more than we should be, and that's why it's becoming a problem. So, for example, if we look at sitting, so babies, they're not ready to be put in sitting positions until they've got good head control and they are starting to get a little bit stronger and able to participate in holding their bodies up against gravity. So in the past, what would happen is a parent would put their baby into a sitting position on the floor or on their laps, and with their hands they could feel the baby's not quite there yet, so they would hold them, and then after a while the baby would sort of flop down, and you can't hold someone in a floppy position, even a tiny baby, for extended amounts of time. So the parent would then stop and then go back to holding them or lie them down on their tummies or their backs. Whereas nowadays, we put them from a very young age in those bouncy chairs because that's kind of sitting. And so then the baby stays there. They're very happy because they're being bounced and they're being supported. But unfortunately, they shouldn't be in that semi-upright position yet. And so what happens is that, first of all, the head shape, because they're happy in that bouncer, because they're being stimulated, they're now a bit more upright so they can see a bit more. They don't have to work to see what's going on. They lie very still, and so we have pressure in the same spot on the back of the head on quite a firm surface. So we have a lot of head shape issues occurring because of the bouncy chairs, because the babies lie dead still. Whereas if they were at least just on the floor, the baby would get bored and then be turning their head from side to side or trying to move or cry, and you would go and pick them up. Now you put them in the bouncy chair, they're stimulated, they're being bounced, they're looking at toys, they spend ages there, hardly moving, and we have pressure occurring. The other thing is with a bouncy chair, there's no control in it. So they're lying in it, but if you stop bouncing them, they want to replicate that bounce, so they might push their bodies backwards. And what we see is this overworking of the muscles in the back to extend the body and open up the hips and push the body almost into a plank, into one straight position. And then when you come and try and sit your baby, they start pushing themselves backwards because that's what they know to do in that seated position. There are some other floor sitters, bumbo seats, all of these kinds of things, which sometimes I say to parents, well, if your baby has a real problem with their head shape and you need to put them down for 10 minutes, and you know if you put them on their tummies, they're going to scream. So you put them on their backs and all you've got is a really hard floor, and they're going to end up looking in the position where all the pressure is going on the back of their head. I might say for 5 minutes, use one of those seats because they don't have any pressure at the back of their head. So sometimes it can be a means to an end, but again, it's containment. We don't like equipment for a baby. We'd prefer them to be free on the ground, and ideally building up time to get ready to be left on their tummies and then doing all that strengthening work on their tummies because they're happier being on their tummies. So we limit that anyway, but it's not quite as bad as the bouncer because they're not being encouraged to bounce backwards and thrust their bodies backwards, and their hips are a bit more bent. Also, they're slightly older when we put them in these seats, so they're closer to getting to the age where they should be sitting. However, it's robbing them again of opportunity because the alternative would be maybe you would be holding your baby in a sitting position and they would be starting to be a bit more active and developing that strength in a way they should. So these kind of sitting equipments aren't really helpful. And in the past, we wouldn't have had so many varieties of sitting equipment because if you think about it now, you've got a car seat, a baby bouncer, the floor sitting chairs, the high chairs, all of these things that we didn't used to use that make a baby sit before they're ready to sit on their own, actually. And even our push chairs, we find lots of parents will say, oh, it's supposed to be 6 months when we turn our babies around from lying on their backs looking at me to sitting up in the pushchair and looking out. But my baby's really curious and my baby is bored lying on their back. So we do it earlier than 6 months. And sometimes that's okay. But a lot of the time, babies nowadays aren't sitting at 6 months. 6 months can be quite early for a lot of babies to be sitting. So they really aren't ready. And sometimes we even doing it earlier because they're bored lying on their backs. And it might be that they've lain on their backs all day and all night. They don't want to be lying on their backs in the pushchair anymore. So these are all unhelpful habits because they're not ready to be put in these sitting positions. And if we look at the car seat, the bouncer, and the pushchair. The problem here is, again, they're all slightly reclined, so their hips are quite open. They all are going to encourage the baby to thrust backwards, or the baby's going to be at the mercy of gravity and slump to the side, slump forwards. It squashes them, it builds asymmetry. If they've got a head turning preference, they're going to definitely slump in their preferred direction, and it can lead to all sorts of asymmetries, tightnesses. And we know whenever there's any asymmetry in the body, babies can overcome it without it being a big deal. But if they've also got a core that isn't as strong as it should be, or their postural muscles aren't as strong as they should be because they haven't spent the time on the tummy that they should have done, any of these kind of asymmetries or thrusting backwards is going to make it very hard for them to develop along the typical neurotypical development range, because they're going to just keep relying on all their asymmetrically strong muscles, and their core just remains switched off, doesn't do any work because it can't, it's not ready to do it. And then we put them in these really challenging positions they're not ready for, and so they kind of hang on for dear life and overuse muscles that they shouldn't be using. The classic example of this actually is with standing. Now, babies are born with a reflex. It's called the stepping reflex. So when the foot comes into contact with the ground, the baby pushes and straightens their knee. And that supposedly, we think, is to enable them to help us in the birthing process. They push on the uterine wall and help to kind of walk out the womb almost. And they're just a bit more active in it than what we previously realized. However, that stepping reflex means that a tiny baby, when you hold them upright and you put their feet in contact with the ground, they're going to push straight. So it's going to make them stand. Now, this isn't controlled standing. This is a reflex. And like with making a baby sit when they're not ready to sit, they're going to use the incorrect muscles. The baby's going to cling on to that reflexive straightening of the legs. And tiny babies, before this reflex goes away as it should, if you put the baby's foot down on the ground, they will reflexively respond by straightening their knees. So it looks like they're trying to stand, and parents love it. And they keep doing it. And what happens is that that reflex then doesn't go away. It keeps happening, that locking the knees and making them stand. And parents will say, oh my gosh, my baby's so strong. So they keep doing it. It keeps making the baby strong, using this reflexive straightening of the legs as opposed to controlled attempt to stand and to use the muscles correctly and to switch on the core, which is really important for standing. They just use this mass extension, we call it. And so what happens is that that reflex doesn't go away, but it then also robs them of opportunity to strengthen everywhere else and to learn to stand properly. So very often I will see a baby for delayed development. They're not sitting yet. They're certainly not crawling, possibly not rolling, but the parents will say, but they love standing. They're so strong at standing. And it's not true strength. It's this reflexive response that has never gone away as it should have if we weren't constantly putting our babies on their feet. Now, the likelihood of a parent causing that to happen just by holding a baby in a standing position because the baby likes it is quite low. Usually, the reason why this is happening is because not only are the parents holding them in a standing position, but they're also putting them in a jolly jumper or a jumperoo or whatever those equipments are called, where the baby hangs and bounces on their feet, or a walking ring or a bouncing ring. And these things are all too early for the baby. The baby shouldn't be upright. They shouldn't be standing. They shouldn't be feeling the effects of gravity at that level yet. They should be down on the ground learning to bend and strengthen in a different way. So it's very much like if I said to you, here's a program, here's Simone Biles's balance beam program. This is what she does to train to be as good as she is on the beam. You go and do it. Impossible. You can't do it. Your body just doesn't have the capacity to work against gravity and to be strong enough and to balance well enough to just pick up her program and expect to go and do what she can do. However, you would start really slowly and build up. Okay, you might not get to Simone Biles's level, but you would be able to do something quite remarkable on the beam if you started off at your level and built what needs to be put in place in order to get to that level. And so what we're doing with our babies by putting them in all these positions and equipments, which is actually my third point, is we are expecting them to do something they cannot possibly do. And so they do it wrong. They do it badly. They use cheating movements and they cling on with all the wrong muscles. So it's been a bit long-winded, and we've merged my 2 points, which is the use of equipment and putting your baby in certain positions before they're ready, because that's ultimately the problem with equipment, is that it puts them in a position they're not ready to be in, which reinforces poor movement patterns. Or the other issue with equipment is it robs them of opportunity to strengthen and develop and be on their tummies. And it also puts them in positions where they're going to have sustained levels of pressure in one area on the back of their heads. And so it causes these head shape issues. So to wrap this up, my take-home message is give your baby opportunity and a space to move unhindered and initiated by themselves. And if it's a tiny baby, build up to a point where you know they can safely be left on their tummies because you've practiced on your chest, you've practiced in your arms, you've practiced on your legs. But give them an area and give them time to strengthen their muscles at their level. So your baby might be 8 months old, and if you had to look in a developmental guidebook, you might see, oh, babies should be crawling at 8 months. Don't go and try and make them crawl if they're not there yet. If your baby's not yet sitting at 8 months, that's okay. Where are they at? If your baby is not upright yet and they're 8 months old, then leave them on the floor to move and to get to a point where they will gain that balance before trying to get them to crawl. Let them work along their own trajectory. Unfortunately, that trajectory is often delayed because they haven't had opportunity to move freely and to initiate that movement of their own accord, or to be asleep on their tummies and having their little general movements, which are building up strength of the core and the postural muscles. And if your baby has a head shape issue, even more so, you want to leave them on their tummies as much as possible and reach a stage where that's their happy place to be, is playing on their tummies. So create that space, give them opportunity, limit the equipment. I'm sure I'm speaking to people who have loads of baby equipment, all the things I've just told you about, and that's okay. Really, all you want to do is make sure you're using it far less than what you're using the floor for your baby to move in, and just make sure it's safe. Make sure they have open, unrestricted airflow to their airways and enjoyment for them. If you have time to be down on the floor with them, interacting with them, then do it. If you can't and you're leaving them there, make sure they're safe to be left there. And as I say, it's better for a baby to be lying flat on their back than to be propped up in a piece of equipment that is holding them in a sitting position. I know everyone is going to be spending time with their babies propped up in sitting positions at some stage during the day because we have to. It's high chairs, as I said, car seats, pushchairs that face out. But just try to limit that with what you're doing in your home when you have other options. And if your baby hates being left on their tummies or on their backs, then you have to slowly give them opportunity to get used to it. Do little and often. As soon as they moan, you pick them up, you comfort them, you return them down to the floor. And so you build the time slowly, slowly, slowly. So I hope that's been helpful. If you do have any questions, please do reach out. If you do have a baby that has delayed development or a head shape issue, please, go to your GP. And if you get advice that doesn't quite sit right, or they say you don't have to do anything, then keep looking, because there are always avenues. And when you approach someone, even if it's a private practitioner, the idea is that they teach you what to do with your baby. You're not reliant on them to be doing physiotherapy every day with your baby. They should teach you once off what to do, and then perhaps review the baby in 6 weeks, 2 months time, and then give you more activities now that the baby's outgrown the previous activities. So it shouldn't be a massive investment for you. And If you are concerned about your baby's head shape, as I said, I'll put the link in the show notes to the free PDF that gives you lots of advice. I also have an online course for head shape that walks you through everything you need to know. If your baby's head shape is a little bit more complex, or if it's what we call a plagiocephaly or plagiocephaly, so it's on one side, or if they have a head turning preference, then it's certainly going to be a really, really helpful and cost effective way to treat it. So I'll pop that in the show notes too. And then to finish off, if you can post a question on my podcast or a question on my YouTube channel, if you're watching this, I'm going to select one question from the pod and one from YouTube to form the basis of my next episode or an episode in the future. But whoever's question I select, you will also win a complimentary half-an-hour remote session with me where we can talk about anything about your baby. It doesn't have to be the question you've put there, any kind of baby or even mother overwhelm and stress issues, because that's also what I deal with. So yes, please do pop your questions there, and I will be happy to answer as many as I can. But as I say, just one will be selected from each to have a complimentary session with me. So with that, as always, it's time for me to wish you all the very best and all the best for your baby.